Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories being followed in the upcoming edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined by North Coast Journal's news editor, Thad Greenson, and arts and features editor, Jennifer Famiko Cahill. Welcome, guys.
Hey, David. How you doing?
Right on. Doing well. A little sunshine out there today, and got some good news, friends, family news about more vaccines in the pipeline. So I think people are starting to look towards that 4th of July weekend as a potentially, fulfilling and rewarding date on the calendar where we might actually have some degree of normalcy. So hopefully that's permeating your guys' lives as well.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Stay optimistic, right? That's the best we can do. So Thad, let's dive right in. What's going on the cover this week of the North Coast Journal?
Well, this week is our annual Cannabis issue, so it is about all things cannabis news recently. But occupying the actual cover space of the paper is a story following up on some reporting we did a couple years ago about the Rohnert Park Public Safety Department, so the police department in Rohnert Park, and some cannabis interdiction activities they'd been doing that raised a lot of questions.
From the article, it looks like there's been a federal indictment handed down on one of the local police departments in the 101 corridor. Can you tell us a little bit about the background on that and kind of what brought us to this point?
Yeah, so two officers have been indicted in the case so far, and their indictments were unsealed Friday. And so that's a lot of the documentation was the actual charging document that we built the story on. But the story takes root back in December of 2017 when a man by the name of Zeke Flatten, actually a movie producer, was looking to dabble in the cannabis industry, visited Humboldt County, bought 3 pounds of cannabis, and was transporting it south to a lab in the Bay Area for testing, when he claimed that he was pulled over by an unmarked SUV and by 2 officers who were wearing kind of tactical gear, but no badges, no name tags, no patches, kind of affiliating them with a specific agency. They identified themselves as being with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and asked if he was carrying cannabis. He said he was. They asked to search the vehicle, found the 3 pounds, and basically said, "We're taking these. You can expect to receive a letter from Washington, D.C., and we're going to go now." Zeke Flatten is a former cop himself, and a really sharp guy. I mean, just from interviewing him, he's one of these people who has a pretty meticulous memory and an eye for detail. And he said that just didn't feel right. Something felt really off about the stop. He noticed that the officers never ran. He gave them his license, but they never ran his name back to dispatch to see if there was any warrants or anything out for him. Didn't seem to run the license plate of his car. And didn't give him a receipt for the seizure of his cannabis. And so he said pretty quickly he came to feel that he was robbed. He also noticed that while they said they were from a federal agency, the car that they were driving had California exempt license plates, which didn't line up. Again, he's a pretty sharp guy who picks up on these details. And so he pretty quickly came to feel that he'd been robbed by what he figured were actual law enforcement officers, but acting outside the scope of their duties. So he made a complaint to the FBI and to the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, because the traffic stop happened in Mendocino. And that's kind of what got this ball rolling, that now, almost 2.5 years later has resulted in these indictments. Almost 3.5 years later.
So one of the things that he said was that it wasn't the actual loss of value that really triggered this. It was his thoughts about something bigger must have been going on. If this is how he was getting treated, that maybe other people were getting treated the same way. So you said he reached out to federal law enforcement, but he also reached out to local media. Is that right? And kind of what element did local media play in bringing the story, the momentum that built around this original complaint?
Yeah, it played a huge role, and certainly Zeke Flatten feels like it was crucial, that it was really the tipping point. But I guess to your first point, yeah, he said that he really felt like it wasn't the loss of $3,000 worth of weed, it was the violation. And as somebody who'd been a police officer previously, I mean, he kind of understood that oath of office, and he also just started wondering, like, if these guys are so brazen that they are going to impersonate federal officers outside of their jurisdiction and stop me in broad daylight and steal my weed. Like, what else are they doing? And who else are they doing this type of thing to? So worry, he said that he made the complaint to the FBI and felt like it was initially kind of taken seriously or whatever, but he was worried that it would just kind of die quietly, that it would make it from kind of the main FBI office to the field office and then just kind of quietly go away. And so he decided, I think about a month after making the complaint, to contact Kim Kemp, a reporter based in Southern Humboldt. And to her credit, she took it very seriously, and started, vetting his story, making calls. And one of the last calls that she made before kind of going public with his allegations was a call to ATF. Just saying, hey, did you have officers in the field this day in this area? And were you involved in this traffic stop? And while some of the other agencies had kind of been, I'd say, a little bit evasive or a little bit squirrely or not really, they didn't seem terribly interested in her inquiries. ATF did. And ATF, I think, seems like really kind of its ears perked up at the idea that somebody might be out there impersonating its officers. And so not only did they give a statement to Kim, but they also immediately kind of reached out to Zeke and asked if they could contact Zeke Flatten. And I think he said that they were on the phone with him within an hour of Kim contacting them. And then come to find out, they then exerted some pressure, it sounds like, on the FBI and on local agencies to kind of saying, hey, this is something that needs to be taken seriously. And Zeke really believes that Kim's inquiry and then her subsequent reporting really got this ball rolling. And after she reported, I think, one or two stories on Zeke's allegations, the lead Roner Park officer who's been indicted, or former officer, J.C. Tatum, who headed the Roner Park interdiction team, took a really kind of interesting step of issuing a press release kind of in response to Kim's coverage, trying to explain away Zeke's allegations. The indictment certainly says that this was a fraudulent press release and a fraudulent police report designed to kind of cover his tracks. That's the allegation anyway. But there were some things that just didn't match up about the press release. And from just a journalist who's seen gobs and gobs of law enforcement press releases, it just was strange. It didn't have an exact date. It didn't have an exact time. It didn't identify the kind of car Zeke was driving. It didn't name him, it didn't have his name in the press release. Didn't identify a quantity of marijuana seized. It was atypical. And I think a lot of people noticed that, and then it brought a new attention to this case.
So the charges are for two officers, Tatum and Huffaker, are conspiracy to commit extortion under the color of official right. And then former Officer Tatum, also faces additional charges of falsifying records in a federal investigation in order to cover up alleged theft.
Right.
So what?
And then also a charge of tax evasion as well.
Oh, right. Exactly. Yeah. Like Al Capone, that tax man will always get you. So, what kind of transpired in this investigation, that what are some of the elements of the story that kind of stand out to you? Like that you said he was the head of a interdiction task force.
Yeah.
And so, what are some of the details that kind of stand out in terms of the 101 corridor interdiction team?
So I think there's three things I'd want to hit on there. The first, it was actually not in the indictment, but was uncovered by KQED in an investigation it did after Kim Kemp's initial reporting in this. And they requested gobs and gobs of records from Roner Park, and they found two things that were kind of interest. One is that Roner Park was kind of nationally awarded for its interdiction efforts at the time, for just the the quantities of cannabis it was seizing and the amounts of cash it was seizing. And this was, from a law enforcement perspective, an enormously effective interdiction team headed by Tatum. And then they found that basically when a law enforcement agency seizes, say, 50 pounds of cannabis, it's kind of impractical to expect them that they're just going to hold all that as evidence until the case goes to trial. And so what they do in these large drug seizure cases is they hold on to a sample of it, but then they destroy the rest. And there's a really meticulous process that they have to follow to do this, of getting a court destruction order, and then they're supposed to transfer the drugs to a specific officer who's then ordered to destroy them in a very specific way, and then document it with the destruction documentation. And so what KQED found is that for at least 800 pounds of cannabis over like a 2-year period, Roner Park was unable to actually show documentation that it was destroyed. They had court orders telling the department to destroy it, and they had documentation that it had been handed off to J.C. Tatum, the sergeant in control of such things, but there was no actual, proof that it had been destroyed. So that raised a lot of questions. Then in the indictment itself, federal agents reviewed lots of body camera footage from the Roanoke Park Police Department, and they were able to document numerous cases. I think they identify 5 or 6 of them in the actual indictment itself, but where officers seized cannabis or cash from drivers. I think Tatum was involved in all these traffic stops, and did not provide them with any documentation, did not provide them with a seizure receipt, and then also for which the agents were unable to find any other documentation of this traffic stop. So within Roanoke Park police records, it was as if the stop had never happened, it never existed, there's no police report attached to it or anything like that. But they have this footage of them actually taking custody of cannabis from people. So that raised a lot of questions. And then the last aspect is just the IRS investigation. The IRS did what seems like a pretty exhaustive investigation over several years of Sergeant Tatum's financial records. And what they claim to have found is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of cash deposits into his and his wife's bank accounts and family members' bank accounts. All of them in sums less than $10,000, and if you deposit over $10,000 in cash, the bank is required to report that to the IRS. And so they're alleging that this is very much a pattern of somebody trying to conceal illicit profits. And so all of these 3 things together, I think, really raised questions about the scope of what was happening in Roanoke Park over this time period. And while the indictment is really related to 2 specific traffic stops in December, and then for Sergeant Tatum, the tax evasion and the attempt to cover up as well, I think the other information in the indictment really kind of leads one to believe there might be other shoes to drop and there might be other actions coming.
Gotcha. Well, there's so much more in the article. Hopefully people check it out. Thank you for sharing your insights on this with us. I know these officers are facing a lot of time, and we'll see how it plays out, and we'll see how, I'm sure you guys will follow it down its path. Yeah. So one other thing I wanted to ask you about, today, actually, breaking news, happy St. Patrick's Day. There's breaking news in the Sacramento Bee about the Eureka Police Department, a few officers, communications. Can you tell us real briefly a little bit about that breaking story?
Yeah, real briefly, a reporter for the Sacramento Bee obtained from an unnamed source screenshots of group text chats with 6 EPD officers that include just lots of very vile things, misogynistic and really dehumanizing language directed at people that these officers were, charged with protecting and serving. So it really raises a lot of pretty alarming questions. Absolutely something that we at the Journal are following up on as we speak, and we'll continue to do so, and hopefully bring more of that to light.
Well, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, that's available online, like North Coast Journal. Sacramento Bee is also online. Check it out. How about you, Jennifer? What's going on this week on the Arts and Features beat with you?
So for our cannabis issue, I had wanted to include something about, people infusing foods with cannabis for a while, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jessica Ashley Silva. She's written for us before. She covered the Guy Fieri barbecue contest at the fair, the Sweaty Meat Fest, I believe she called it. And I saw that she had posted a while ago a fail. And I love a food fail, but this was an infusion fail. And so I asked her to jump in and write about it. And also, I want to say that I feel partly responsible for this fail. I asked Jessica to write about a cannabis pairing dinner, which was a virtual event. Usually, cannabis dinners, you go and you get a whole infused multi-course meal that I don't know how you get home from. But, and people do these really fancy schmancy meals infused with cannabis. But this was a virtual one, given our times. And so she cooked at home along with a chef who was, using fancy oils and swirling things on dishes. And it was, very, very fancy. And it gave her a sense of maybe hubris. And so she and some friends dove into some cannabis cooking and everything was going great. And then she had this very cheesy burger that was so great on this some sort of infused burger thing. And then she was like, why don't I just make some infused cheese? And she made this attempt, and to her credit, she made a really beautifully formed fresh mozzarella balls. And, they look great if you look at it in black and white. If you look at it in color, and she wrote about the hubris, the fall, the tragic outcome of trying to infuse it, because it came out sort of the color of silly putty. Sort of a brown, gray, unpleasant. And when she described trying it, she was like, please don't taste brown. Please don't taste brown. Please. And it tasted so brown. It tasted, as she describes it, as tasting like dirt, hay, and dead plants.
Ooh.
You can't spin that. Yeah. And then, of course, like a good, grown, raised in the right family, she tried not to throw out food, and she tried to apply it to a pizza with a lot of garlicky pesto, and nothing could cover the taste of swamp from that mozzarella. But she talks about sort of the basics of how you infuse food, and it was a learning experience for me to read about. But also, I really like her attitude. If you're in Humboldt Foodies, you know her as one of the admins, and she's very funny. And even honestly, I always enjoy when she, blocks someone or kicks them off of the site. It's always great fun. But she talks about the value of food fails. And most of the time on something like Humboldt Foodies, we're sharing, our successes. Look at this amazing rack of lamb I made. Look at this fantastic fettuccine I made. And people don't really share like, oh, Jesus, what did I do to this poor piece of meat? But here she is. And she was saying that she learned something, which is that, okay, mistakes were made. And here's what she could do instead next time. Like maybe a flavorless, instead of working directly from flour, maybe she could use, a flavorless extract would be better next time. Or, maybe mozzarella is meant to just be a mozzarella, right? It has that pure milk. Maybe we infuse other things. But she took it as a learning experience. And she also was like, well, you know what? I did figure out how to make some cheese. So hopefully she'll be back to do that again. But if you've ever tried, failed, or tried to smile through someone else's failed infusion meal, I strongly recommend it. I mean, the only thing that I forgot to ask her is I would imagine that the THC quality was still there. But despite that, I think, despite the effects of cannabis, it didn't make her enjoy it anymore, which is too bad. But I get the boost of enjoyment that people get from, having cannabis infused foods. I totally get the draw. If it's a tenth of what I experienced when I was pregnant, then I don't know why everyone's not eating cannabis infused food all the time. But other than having to drive. But yeah, it's a fun read, and you should definitely check it out, and definitely not do what she did. That is my advice.
Yeah. So it sounds like mozzarella should be left as mozzarella. You don't need to infuse it.
It's kind of, isn't there already a high to cheese?
Yeah.
Isn't cheese its own drug?
So
it takes more and more. Yeah.
Speaking of own drug, you did a satirical piece, maybe not so satirical, cannabis strains we need in 2021 and wish were real. Tell us a little bit about that, because that is hysterical.
I'm going to say it's only barely satirical because, so I've done this for a few years in a row, and I have had a couple of people who were like, so I don't understand, where can you buy these?
Yeah.
Actually, there isn't one that makes you feel like a Disney princess. That's not real. I made it up. But what I like to do is go through and look at real strains and look at their descriptions and how they describe the crosses and whatnot, and look at some of the really hilarious names that they have. And I must say that one of the challenges is coming up with names that aren't already strains. So, when I was looking up, like, there's a strain that, a fake strain that is for people who are really upset about Dr. Seuss. If you're like really upset about it, which, relax. Relax. What happened on Mulberry, or what was it? What I saw on Mulberry Street. I have a copy. It's not great. It's no cat in the hat, but people are so upset about not making more of them. The ones that are out there, but people are so upset about it. And I thought, well, I should have a strain that helps people cope with that stress. And I looked up and I could not believe there isn't already a strain called Who Hash, but evidently an opportunity missed. And there are a few other ones some of them that are meant to help you through the stress of the pandemic, like Darth Vaxxer, which is sort of my little tribute to Thad, who is a very big Star Wars fan, as you can see from his background. And Legion of Zoom, which is meant to help you feel more like you're really in the room with people when you're even on screen. Which I personally don't want. But some people might, it can be very draining having all your interactions remotely, she says, as she's having a Skype conversation with someone that she used to sit in a studio with.
Truth.
But it's fun to do.
So there's one, Q-tips, which I think was really funny about QAnon, and there's some other contemporary references, but others are just more like, broadly appealing, I suppose. Like, tell us about Sofa Cushion.
Sofa Cushion is for when you just need to ride out the rest of the pandemic, just keeping it mellow. A lot of people have tried to be really productive during this, and personally, I feel that's a mistake. It's been so emotionally and mentally taxing for us to go through the ups and downs and the sort of national grief and personal grief and all those things. And yet we have all these things telling us, you need to hustle. You need to be working on your side gig. You need to be, and some of that is survival financially, but some of it is just the social pressure of always be productive, always be doing something. And so this particular strain allows you to just, what do I have that it's a couple of indica strains, Inertia and Lazy Boy, to help you sink deeper and deeper into your couch until you become one with it, which, let me help you with that.
Tap into your inner Fauci Juan Kenobi.
Yes. Somebody feel free if people want to make these strains, just send me a small fee and we'll be good.
Yeah, you got to trademark that stuff. Well, right on. There's a lot more in that article. Definitely, folks, check it out. That's just about going to do it for us this week. It flies by, unfortunately. North Coast Journal is available on newsstands now, available online. Pick one up, stay informed, stay safe. Thad, Jennifer, thank you both so much, and we'll see you guys again next week.
See you next week.
Be well.